presentation introduces the UNESCO-sponsored International Decade of Indigenous Languages, and specifically Translation Commons efforts to promote the digitization of Indigenous languages as the primary goal of its Zero to Digital project. My own personal contribution has been to coordinate the creation of a terminology guideline. This project follows on UNESCO's Year of Indigenous Languages project, which was planned for 2020 and is co-sponsored and facilitated by UNESCO and the United Nations with the support from member states, NGOs, many academics, Indigenous language groups, and not the least an array of tech companies such as Google, Facebook, Adobe, Microsoft, and others. When I speak of Indigenous languages, I often invoke the image of the long tail of languages, where most of the people in the world speak between 10 and 23 of over 6,500 or even 7,000 languages, as recorded by entities like the Ethnologue. These few languages include English, Mandarin Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, Standard Arabic, Bengali, French, Russian, Portuguese, and Urdu. Most everyone speaks languages in the top 300. Out in the long tail, 2,000 of the languages are spoken by fewer than 1,000 persons each. 40% of these languages are endangered and may be gone by the end of this century. They are scattered across the world in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and Oceania. Only 1,000 of the world's languages have been digitized, which means that people who speak as their native tongue one of the languages in the long tail generally have to learn and master a dominant language in order to use any kind of digitized equipment or devices. These dominant languages frequently reflect patterns of colonialism. Why the focus on Indigenous languages? We are hoping that the creation of digital access will further the preservation of heritages with unique systems of knowledge and understanding of the world, even as we see precious elders age out and die even of COVID, often leaving younger generations whose acquisition of their languages has been eradicated by educational programs designed to enforce dominant languages. Our efforts are designed to support Indigenous people in protecting their environments, which are ever more threatened by countless projects, including oil pipelines, diamond mines, jungle clearing for agriculture, and countless others efforts to exploit their homes and their sacred lands. Consequently, we're urging people to be able to create new content and to be able to communicate using digital tools and invoking technological standards using their own languages. As noted, our goal with language technology is to enable communities to digitize, to use modern media. The purpose is not only to enable them to use the internet, however, but we also want to encourage young people to honor their languages and their culture, and to be able to use technology in order to create new resources and to apply the digital applications that they are mastering in their education. This slide is an early one that we created for the initial work in 2020 and covers a wide range of activities. It's presented as a kind of workflow, but this doesn't mean that activities have to proceed in lockstep, in order, as presented here. For instance, some languages already have fonts, already have scripts, others have none. So depending on the availability of resources, it's possible to begin audio recordings and fieldwork to collect information on languages even before the work has been completed of creating a font, creating keyboards, registering a language with Unicode, and implementing all this technology in applications that can be used by the speakers of the language. Translation Commons has put together a variety of experts in not just linguistics, but also in technological matters and terminology management, graphic design, and a full spectrum of other activities in education in order to implement the technology that is needed by individual groups. We have engaged experts all over North America and Europe, but also scattered all over the world. One of the major accomplishments of our core group to date is the creation of a set of guidelines. Zero to Digital provides an initial overview of project planning and general methodologies for the overall project. Language data gathering provides just that, a wide range of different topics addressing everything from the collection of a group of people to go about creating your resources to how to create databases with these resources and how to protect your data once you have created it. The terminology guidelines focus specifically on the terminological approach to the documentation of linguistic data, in parallel with lexicographical and grammatical information that will be collected under the guidelines in the language data gathering activity. Machine translation guidelines will address the kinds of activities that can be taken on in order to create by-text resources to support eventual neural network translation, machine translation, which is a goal of many, frequently of many who don't understand the vast resources that it takes to truly do this effectively. Our future guidelines will include guidelines for mentoring groups who are creating resources and interpreting guidelines for those who have no access to the kinds of interpreter training that we're familiar with in other environments. The challenges of creating these guidelines involve the realization that we have to write in a very different way because we're writing for a collection of different kinds of individuals. Some may indeed be linguists, whereas others are speakers of the language. Some may not speak the language at all. Given the diversity of the intended audience, we need to avoid too scholarly an approach. And we need to think through how to present ideas using plain language and clear instructions. Furthermore, we have to be able to relate the different sets of guidelines to each other in order to create a set of coherent resources. Our guidelines frequently begin with some sort of workflow or flow chart. For instance, for this language codes, we have the questions. Do you have a language code? Is a Unicode font available? Has the font been implemented on devices you want to use? Do you have input support for keyboards and keyboard pad support for those devices? Do you have third-party support for apps that you want to use? Because, of course, if you don't have keyboard support in a given app, just having it recorded in Unicode is not going to solve your problems. When beginning any given project, it's important to plan out a series of actions to be carried out for that particular project, which has to begin with the evaluation of any existing digital support or even just script support for that language. Suggest approaches to your collaborators that can be used to develop basic digital language support using a new script. Encourage the practical use of language tools as you begin to create them for that language. Point to the available tools and techniques that could exist and discuss how you can create new applications for that language. No matter what you are doing, you want to engage community members and ensure that the community is on board with decisions that are made either concerning language or the evolution of tools. All the way through, we have hopes to be able to provide technical support in order to enlist a wide variety of individuals in creating your support tools. In the creation of the terminology guidelines per se, we begin by invoking some of the same points that are cited in the earlier guidelines and move on then to analyze the status of digitization, if it exists at all, when we get to the terminology management stage. In some cases, we'll have to track back in that workflow that I showed you in order to pick up on certain bits and pieces that may have been neglected along the way. We focus on how to collect language samples, how to identify words and terms in the context of the evolution of a grammar, but then moving on to the terminological view where we look at concepts, identify how they work in the language, which may be very different from languages with which researchers are familiar. Then moving on to create new terms. And here we see an example of a Cherokee word, which in Cherokee means lightning paper and reflects our electronic mail. The creation of terminological resources will then become an important step toward creating resources that can be used if and when we are able to use CAD tools to translate, to create bytext that can be used for machine translation. This slide just demonstrates a few of the languages with which we have actually been working directly and for which we have already created scripts and begun implementing the use of mobile devices. We have Cherokee, Fulfulde, and Chakma. Another one that is very far along in its activity is Sunawar. Another language of India.